Ever since I first made this channel, I knew at some point I'm gonna have to tell this story, but I just kept putting it off because it's hard to even think about this. This is probably, it's one of those things, and I mean, for me, it's the main thing where it's like, just the memory of this, it keeps me up at night. And by now, I have mostly just totally repressed this memory. I've just pushed this memory down into the abyss of my soul, so I don't even have to think about it. And I mean, the thing is, it's just really hard to talk about this. I have lots of memories in my life that make me cringe when I think about it, but nothing compares to this. So this all happened back in, I'm pretty sure it was my senior year of high school. I was like 17 years old, and I met this girl. She was, uh, basically, she was the daughter of a family friend's friend. So basically, her parents were friends with one of my mom's friends. Hopefully, that's not too hard to understand. But yeah, so basically, my parents had a party at our house, and there was a bunch of people that came over. And so I guess these people came over that I had never met before. And I think actually maybe it was my parents' first time meeting them too. But, anyways, so their daughter came over, and she was about my age. She's a year younger than me. And so it was like a bunch of people in their 40s and 50s, and then me and this girl that were at the party. And this is at my house, by the way. So for that whole night, it was just me and this girl hanging out together. And I don't know what it was. I think it was just because the fact that, I was at my house, and for the most part, we were hanging out in my room. So I think it was just because, I'm in my environment, my most comfortable, the most comfortable place in the world that I could be. That's where we were. Yeah, so basically, I was actually able to talk to this girl and be social, and I was actually able to kind of be myself and be a normal person. And when I met her, I felt comfortable around her. And at the time, I was convinced that, it must be like there's a special connection between us, because I had then, and I still have now, just crippling social anxiety. And, it was actually probably even worse back then when I was a teenager. So I had never in my life been able to just socialize freely and just feel comfortable and even, feel confident around any girl. So the fact that this girl was at my house, and I felt comfortable enough around her that I could just talk to her freely, and I was even flirting with her. I was like legit flirting with her, and she was into it. So I thought it was something. At the time, I was like, there's a magical, special connection between us. There's something special about this girl. And I thought, I'm never gonna find that again. There's something special here. So I was immediately just like obsessed with this girl. And just to give a basic description, she was kind of a alternative style girl, and not like she wasn't goth or anything. She was, I guess, kind of a indie rock type hipster type of girl. And this was maybe like, I don't know, 2006, 2007, something like that. So, you know, I don't know that anyone was even using the hipster label. She was kind of a scene girl. Yeah, that's really the best description. Kind of a scene girl. but I would say like she was like a mild scene girl. You know, she didn't have like the crazy hair and crazy makeup or anything, but she was like slightly alternative style. I don't know. Just to give a basic description. And like, you know, even at the time, I could tell like she's not that hot. Like she wasn't anything special really how she looked. She was attractive, I guess, but I don't know. It was more so that I just felt like there must be some kind of special connection between us. You know, that was the whole thing that led to my infatuation with her. It wasn't really her looks that I was super attracted to. I did find her attractive, but I even remember specifically that it was like the way that I felt for her at the time. Um, I remember it was like I couldn't even jack off to her because I felt like she was too special for that. So yeah, if that probably if that gives you any indication of the kind of like the mentality I had back at the time, yeah, like I couldn't even jack off to her because I thought, you know, she's better than that. She's too special for that. I can't think about her like that. So yeah, so you know, I met her at this party at my house, and we talked all night for a few hours or whatever, however long she was at my house. And, you know, nothing happened between us, but I was flirting with her. I was acting like I'm a cool guy. And she totally bought into it. She was flirting with me too. And it was just like the first time, only time really in my life that anything like that had happened. And it, you know, like I say, I just felt like there's something special here. This is special. And I thought this is never going to happen again. I was convinced like there's no way. I mean, I guess in a way I was right. Well, kind of. But yeah, I was like this is a me meeting this girl is a once in a lifetime event, and I was like I have to. You know, I just felt like I was in love with her instantly. So so after the party, I think it was like the very next day, I sent her a message on MySpace, and I can't remember what all we said, but basically we started, you know, we would message back and forth on MySpace over the course of a few weeks. We were messaging each other pretty frequently, and sometimes I would message her first, sometimes she would message me first, and we were both very much like flirting with each other. And it just kind of seemed inevitable, like that we were going to get together. And eventually, I asked for her number and she gave it to me. So then we started texting. So we would text each other and we would also message each other on MySpace. So this was going on for, I mean, it felt like a long time, but I don't really know. It could have just been like 2 or 3 weeks or something. I don't really know. But eventually, and I can't even remember if it was me that brought up the idea or if it was her, but basically, I ended up sneaking out of my house at like in the middle of the night, maybe like 1 a.m. or something like that. And I drove over to her house so we could smoke weed together at her house in the middle of the night. So I did. I went over there, you know, and just talking about this now, you know, obviously, like, I've been sending flirtatious messages with this girl back and forth for like weeks, and now I'm sneaking out of my house to come to her house in the middle of the night, you know, to smoke weed together. Like, it's obvious it's obvious what's going on, you know, like I'm supposed to make a move, obviously. But of course, you know, I was in freeze cell mode And for those of you that aren't familiar with that type of esoteric terminology, uh, freeze cell mode just basically means, I was frozen. I was. It's I don't know what it seemed like to her. Like I really wonder like what she was thinking at this time because on the night we met, I was like being very outgoing and she probably thought that I'm just like in general I'm just an outgoing cool guy. And then I go over to her house in the middle of the night and she's probably thinking we're going to hook up. And I mean, I was also thinking like that's going to happen. But then on that night, I was back to my regular self, probably because we were at her house and not my house. And also because there was all the. And I mean, actually, when I first got there, I was being a little bit. So, like, I wasn't being a total freeze cell at first. But then after we smoked, I was just like, that really set off my anxiety. And I started freaking out like, oh shit, I was thinking like, this is, you know, I was frozen. There's not much else I can say about that. So, and it was also kind of like, we were just, I never went inside her house because she was afraid of her parents waking up. So we just sat on her back porch and we smoked weed and we were basically like whispering anytime we talked because, we're trying to like not wake up her parents. So I don't know. I don't know. It was, it's cringy to even think about this, but this is only the beginning of this story. This is only just the very tip of the iceberg of where this story goes. So, after that night, she kind of stopped messaging me pretty soon after that because, she used to message me at random times and I would message her at random times. She would message me, it was like we're friends or whatever, or really it was like we're a guy and a girl that are kind of like in the talking stage of getting together. But then after that, she it kind of stopped. And there was I messaged her after that at least a couple times, and she would message back, but she didn't seem interested anymore. And then I saw on MySpace that she was flirting with some guy pretty hard. And, they were posting on each other's pages. And if you don't know, I know most of you are too young to know about how MySpace worked, but basically, MySpace was basically like Facebook, but you could have like a custom layout on your MySpace, and you could even make your own custom layout using HTML. The way it would work, you would like copy paste the HTML code of a layout that you like find on some MySpace layouts website, and then you would copy paste that HTML into your profile about me section, and that would set the layout on your MySpace. So basically, the reason I'm explaining all this girl had a custom MySpace layout where it made it so that any comments that were left on her page, like any public comments that were left on her page, would be hidden. Okay? And now that was a fairly common thing for people to do at the time. At some point, I had my comments hidden on my page, which in my case was just because I never got comments because I didn't have any friends. So I used a layout that made my comments hidden just so people might think, oh, he has comments. People do comment, but they're just hidden. But anyways, so she had comments hidden on her MySpace from her custom layout, but there was a trick where, if I recall correctly, it would only work on Firefox. You would go to your browser settings and you could set it to basically, you would disable page styles And that would make a person's MySpace profile kind of show up as like plain text with no custom HTML showing. So basically, it would let you read hidden comments. Okay, so I knew this trick where I could read the hidden comments on her MySpace page. And so I was able to read her comments and see, this guy is like sending her flirtatious messages. She's sending him flirtatious messages. And really, she was the one that was like initiating this with this guy. And, as you can imagine, when I saw that, I freaked out, I panicked, and I'm just thinking like, I gotta do something. I gotta get her back. I gotta do something. Because I already felt in my head like she was pretty much my girlfriend, and I knew she wasn't my girlfriend but I felt like she was, like we were meant to be together. Because I just felt like there was something special, right? And I remember I was just feeling like this is the only girl I have ever been able to be my true self around. And it's the only girl I've ever been able to act normal around, just act like a normal person. And I could do that around her. And I was panicking because I thought, I'll probably never find someone like that again. And maybe that was, turned out to be kind of true. But, by now, obviously, I realize it wasn't anything special about her. It was just because, the specifics of how we met, the environment we met in was at my house in an environment that I was comfortable in. And that was the whole thing about it. And, maybe part of it was just the particular mood I was in that day. I don't know. But yeah, it wasn't anything special about her. And that's, obviously. But anyways, so I see that she's flirting with this other guy. And I didn't like that. So I didn't really know what to do because I was very afraid of facing rejection, but I also really wanted to let her know how I feel. And just to give you some indication of my mentality at the time, I literally cried when I saw the messages she was leaving on this guy's MySpace page. I cried. And I cried a lot over like the course of, just after that moment, I cried I cried about this girl a lot. So here's what I did. And this is still like one of the biggest regrets of my life just because of how pathetic and cringy it is. But I wrote her a love letter. And I don't remember exactly what I wrote in the letter, but I do remember I wrote it in cursive, and I tried to use like very aesthetically pleasing handwriting, and I tried to use very flowery language and all that. I tried to make it very prosaic and romantic, and it was just like super, super duper fucking gay. I'm very embarrassed about it. But at the time, that felt like what I should do. And anyways, yeah, so I wrote her this love letter, and I forget exactly how I signed the letter, but basically I left it anonymous. It was basically like a secret admirer type of thing. Because, looking back on it now, obviously that doesn't make any sense. That's a very stupid thing to do. But at the time, I just felt like, I had a lot of feelings, a lot of emotions. My teenage hormones were raging, and I thought, we're meant to be together or something. There's a special connection between us. I really felt like I needed to express my feelings to her, but at the same time, I was completely terrified of having to face the shame of rejection should she reject me. And I kind of assumed she would reject me. I figured, she's flirting with this other guy on MySpace. She's moved on, And truthfully, it was kind of like that, where it's like, to me, she was like the one girl I've ever had any chance with, So, to me, she was everything. But to her, I'm just another guy. Because she'd already, had plenty of boyfriends before me, I'm pretty sure. And if you're familiar with that song by the Doobie Brothers, What a Fool Believes, it's a pretty good song, I think, but that song is like basically the lyrics of that song is about me and this girl in this situation. So give that a listen if you want. But yeah, she was everything to me. I was nothing to her. So obviously, I wrote her this anonymous love letter. I can't send it in the mail because then it would have like a return address. And also, I didn't know her address, but I did know where she lived. Like I knew how to get there, but I didn't know the actual address. So I actually wouldn't have been able to send it in the mail even if I wanted to. So I drove to her house with the letter, and she lived like 45 minutes away, She did not live that close to me. And I drove all the way there in the middle of the night, and I left this love letter on her back porch. I tucked it up under the leg of a chair because I didn't want it to like blow away or anything. And then, well, I thought, she might not find this letter. I thought she might not find it because, yeah, she might not. And so, just retelling this story, like every individual decision I made along the way was the worst possible thing I could have done. I was just continually, I made a string of decisions that was just the dumbest thing. Every step of the way, I did the dumbest thing you could possibly do. So in the dark of the middle of the night, I drive to her house, put this letter on her back porch, and then I got home and I made a new MySpace profile and I named it The Letter Writer or something like that. I'm pretty sure I just called it The Letter Writer. And I sent her a message through that profile telling her where she could find the letter. I said something like, I left a letter on your back porch underneath the leg of the chair. And I used a picture of a sunflower as the profile picture on the letter writer profile. And I even captioned it something like, because I know you love sunflowers. Because I had seen her post something on MySpace at some point about how sunflowers are her favorite flower. And, obviously, all of this makes me look like a deranged stalker. And arguably, everything I was doing is stalker behavior. Of course, I didn't have any bad intentions. I just wanted to express to her how I felt about her. And I was afraid of facing rejection, so that's why it was like an anonymous thing. But looking back, I can see how this is like, it basically is like stalker behavior. And I can understand why she would probably feel, at best, she would feel uneasy about the whole thing. But from my perspective at the time, I didn't even consider that anything I was doing might actually be frightening to her. And I actually don't know if it was, but yeah, looking back, I can see how what I was doing might make her feel uncomfortable. So I sent her that message on this MySpace profile telling her where she could find the letter, and she messaged me back, and she was asking me questions, trying to figure out who I was. And I can't remember what all we said, messaging back and forth, but I remember that she made it pretty clear from the messages she was sending that she thought she knew who it was, but it was clear that she didn't think it was me. She thought it was this other guy that I had never met him, but I knew who he was. She thought it was this guy that used to be her neighbor, that he was like an Abercrombie and Fitch model, and she thought it was that guy. I don't know why, because I don't know much about their history together. I don't think she had ever dated him before. But yeah, so she thought it was that guy, and she made that pretty clear in the messages. And it was also very clear she thought it was that guy, and she was happy about it. And that made me feel like shit. To see her be, actually happy about receiving the letter because she thought it was another guy. And I messaged her, through the letter writer profile. I was telling her, like, I'm not that guy. And she messaged back, she's like, oh, whatever, like she seemed to be pretty sure that it was that guy. And I was like, no, seriously, that's not who it is. But yeah, so she seemed convinced it was that other guy, and she was happy about it. Or, maybe she really did know it was me all along, or she suspected it was me, and she was just doing that to try to trick me in some way. But yeah, I don't know. But she did suspect me eventually, because a few days after that, I remember I was working out in my garage, and I get a call. And I never got phone calls or text messages or anything unless it was my parents, but I was at my own house, so obviously they wouldn't be calling me. So yeah, I got a call, and it was her, and she was asking me if I was the one that left the letter, and I was just like, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know anything about this. And she was saying, she said she knows that it must be me because it says, I can't remember exactly what it was, but basically she mentioned something in the letter and how she knew that must be me that wrote it because it seemed like something that only I would say. And yeah, I don't remember what it was, but I remember it was some kind of pseudo-intellectual nonsense that I had written. And I mean, it probably was pretty obvious that it was me, but I maintained composure, and I was just like, no, for real, it's not me. I don't know anything about this letter. I didn't do that. And, that was that. She was pretty much just like, oh, well, okay. And I don't know if she believed me at the time, but I did not admit to it. So then later on, like I think a few days after that, I can't really remember. It could have been the very next day, but I think it was probably like 2 or 3 days later. She messaged me again on the letter writer profile, and she was basically saying that she knows it's me. And I didn't even respond to that because I had already told her before the last time we were messaging that I wasn't going to be answering any more questions because she was obviously asking me questions, trying to like suss out who it was. So I told her I'm not going to be answering any more questions. And so when she messaged me this time saying, she knows it's me, I was kind of freaking out about it, like, oh shit, I've been found out. But at the same time, I was still just, just kind of delusional in my thinking. And I'm thinking like, well, maybe this is a good thing. Maybe she'll realize how much I care about her. She'll realize how much I care about her, and she'll want to be with me. But yeah, anyway, so I didn't respond to her message, but just a little while after she sent that message, in the same day, she called me again, and as soon as I answered, I could hear she was crying, and she was like, I need to know if it was you or not. I'm scared. I'm freaking out over here. Please just tell me it's you so I don't have to be scared. And, you know, I'm doing my best to recount this story accurately. I don't remember exactly what she said, but I remember she was crying. She was saying that she's scared and, you know, that she was like, please just tell me if it's you because I'm scared. You know, she's basically saying something like that. And yeah, she was crying. And I remember she said she was going to call the police if I didn't admit that it was me because she was scared. And so, again, like I say, every step of the way, I made the worst decision you could possibly make. So, of course, she calls me crying, saying she's so scared. Maybe she was. I don't know. But yeah, so I admitted it. I told her it was me that wrote the letter. And that was a huge mistake. You know, all this wouldn't be so bad. It would still be a cringy memory that I try to repress, but it wouldn't be that bad if I just stuck to my guns and just didn't admit to it. But I did, you know? She called me, she's crying. And, you know, to me, I hear her crying, saying she's scared. And keep in mind, this is the girl that I feel like, you know, she's like special. She's everything to me. So when I heard her crying like that, you know, what am I going to do? I had to admit to it. And it was just a critical mistake, just a huge mistake. So, of course, she told her mom, and then her mom told my parents. So then, you know, my mom is freaking out at me like, how could you do something like this? I didn't raise a stalker. And, you know, she was just being hysterical about it. And I remember my dad didn't say much about it at all. He just kind of, you know, left it to my mom because she was freaking out about it. I think my dad just he probably was just like, whatever, it's not a big deal. But yeah, I don't know. He just didn't say much to me about it. And yeah, so I didn't get grounded or anything, but my mom was like very angry at me about this. And so then I saw on the girl's MySpace that one of her friends had posted on her page asking if she ever found out who left the letter. And she was like, yeah, it was Loser Maxing. And her friend was like, oh my God, that's so scary. Are you okay? And she said something like, you know, I don't remember exactly what it said, but she said something like, I don't know, I'm freaking out right now. You know, it was pretty similar to the stuff she was saying to me on the phone. So now we're getting to the part of the story, you know, this is the worst part. This is the worst part of all of this. And this is the thing that, you know, it's the main reason that this story is so hard for me why it's so hard for me to even think about this. When I saw her comment that she's freaking out or she's, you know, scared, whatever she said, I remember she did say something about like she's freaking out. You know, she used the word freaking out. You know, I saw that and I was thinking, okay, so she's obviously overreacting, but I do understand. And I just felt like, you know, I want to make sure that she knows that it's not like that. You know, there's no reason to be freaking out. There's no reason to be scared because, you know, truthfully, I only had good intentions. It was obviously a stupid thing to do, very misguided. And yes, looking back, I can understand easily why she might be freaking out about it. I understand that. But at the time, you know, truly, I only had good intentions. So I saw that comment and I just wanted to make sure she knew it's not like that. So I sent her a message saying something like, I'm sorry that I wrote that letter. I didn't mean to scare you. You don't need to be freaking out about this. I promise I'm not going to hurt you or anyone else. So, this is where I really fucked up because she said she was freaking out, and I assume she must just, she's just got the wrong idea about all this, and she's freaking out, right? So she must think I'm some kind of deranged murderer or something. So I just wanted to make sure that she knew it wasn't like that. You know, the whole reason I sent the anonymous letter in the first place is just because I was feeling a lot of feelings. I felt like she was really special. And, I had those delusional thoughts like, you know, even if I don't get to be with her, I want her to know how special she is. So I was thinking by sending her, letting her know how much she meant to me, even if it's an anonymous letter, if nothing else, that I'm doing a nice thing, by letting her know how special she is. That's the kind of thoughts I was thinking at the time. And when I saw her comment to her friend that, she was freaking out, the thing is, she probably didn't even actually mean it like, she wasn't actually afraid that I'm going to hurt her or anything. She's just using that kind of language that girls use like, oh, I'm freaking out, She wasn't even freaking out, probably. And she probably didn't think at all that she was in harm's way. It probably didn't even cross her mind that I had any intention of hurting her, right? So when I sent her that message and I said, I promise I'm not going to hurt you or anybody else, it's like I completely fucked up because now I'm putting that idea into her head. So she probably wasn't thinking that before, but after I sent that message, of course now she is thinking it. So yeah, so after I sent that, if she didn't already think that I was a psychopathic stalker, then now she did. And the other thing about this, I sent her that message in response to the comments that her and her friend were making on each other's MySpace pages. And I even used the same phrase that she used, about how she said, I'm freaking out. And I said to her when I messaged her, you don't need to be freaking out about this. Remember, she had comments hidden on her profile. And I remember her friend that she was messaging with also had comments on her page hidden, using her custom layout. So from the phrasing, me using that same phrasing about freaking out in the message that I sent to her, it probably, and I don't know for sure, but she probably realized, hey, he's reading my comments. He's able to read the hidden comments. And, she's a normie, pretty much. So she probably didn't know this no page styles trick using the Firefox browser. She probably didn't know about that trick that you could actually read hidden comments, and it wasn't hacking or anything, but when she saw that message from me, she probably thought that I hacked her MySpace page. So, in multiple ways, I really fucked up when I sent that message. Because, yeah, when I sent the message, I wasn't even thinking about it. It like pretty much slipped my mind that the comments that I was reading between her and her friend were supposed to be hidden comments. I wasn't supposed to be able to see them. And that just totally slipped my mind. So, yeah, that was a major fuck up. And I didn't even think about any of that at all until like a few days later. When I did realize that, I straight up deleted my MySpace. I just deleted my After I sent her that message, she texted me and she said, "If you ever message me again, I'm calling the police." And that's all she said. And that's that's the last I ever heard from her. And after this, after all this happened, and I'm not exaggerating here, for probably like at least 2 years after all this happened, I would literally just sit in my room at night crying about this shit. I would cry myself to sleep at night. I remember I would go out into the driveway in the middle of the night and I would just pace back and forth in the driveway just crying. And I remember fuck it. I mean, I'm telling everything here, okay? I have specific memories. I would listen to this song on my MP3 player. I think it's called Time Machine, or I'm Building a Time Machine, something like that. It's by T-Pain. It's a T-Pain song. And I would pace back and forth in the driveway late at night. I would listen to this T-Pain song and I would just be crying. Because what the song is about is like, I don't even know what it's about, but it's the way that I interpret it is like, he's singing about he has regrets for the past. He wants to build a time machine and go back in time and make better decisions. And that's what I felt like I wished I could do. And, you know, by the way, the reason I was crying about all this all the time and I was so depressed about it, it wasn't as much that I regretted everything I did. It was just I was crying because I didn't get to be with her. Because for like even like a year or two after this, I was so like, it's one-itis. I had one-itis. I had it bad. And when the whole thing with Gym Girl happened, and then again, when the whole thing with Single Mother happened, but much more so with Gym Girl, for whatever reason, it reminded me a lot of my experiences back then, back when I was 17, and it was kind of like having flashbacks to how it felt with the whole situation with this girl. And anyways, like I said, I was hung up on this girl. I had one-itis so bad. It was like for probably 2 years after the last time I saw her, I was still staying up late at night, crying my eyes out, listening to this fucking T-Pain song, pacing back and forth in the driveway in the middle of the night, because I just thought, there's something special about this girl. And the whole thing was because she was the only girl that I was ever able to act like a normal person around, where I felt like I could actually be myself. I could crack jokes around her. And it's so crazy and so delusional looking back on it, because all of this was pretty much based on just the day we met. Because the only other time that I hung out with this girl in person was that time that I went to her house in the middle of the night and we smoked weed on her back porch. But that time I wasn't able to, I was my normal self at that time. So all of these thoughts that I had, all these delusions I had in my head about how we have a special connection, there's something special about this girl. It's a magic. We're destined to be together. We're meant to be together. I had all these thoughts, and it's like all of that was just based on the one day, the one day that we met. And I think a big part of it is because I was a teenager. I was young, hormones raging. I think that was a big part of it. But what can you say? I don't really know what to say. There's no moral of the story. There's no lessons to be learned here. Or I mean, I guess the lesson to learn here is, when it's over, it's over. Don't try to. No girl is special. There's no such thing as, your soulmate or being meant to be together. No girl is any more special than any other. And if you're like me and you're like super high inhibition and you do just have like a one-off night where you're able to actually be yourself and be a cool social guy around a girl, well, don't think that means there's a special connection. It doesn't mean there's anything, because it's also like, when I look back on it, and this girl and who she was, the things she was interested in, she was kind of I said at the beginning, she's kind of an alternative style girl, she was like into kind of like indie rock type stuff. And just all of her interests and stuff was not the same as me, right? We didn't even have common interests really. There was, what I'm saying, it was completely delusional for me to think that there was a special connection there, because it wasn't like that at all. Yes, I liked her and I could tell she liked me too. So, there was like a normal connection between a boy and a girl, which she probably had with every Tom, Dick, and Harry she ever came across, you know? Because the other thing too is just maybe it's unfair of me to say this about her all these years later, but the way that she was flirting with that one guy through MySpace messages, and then the way that when she was messaging me on the letter writer profile, and how excited she was at the concept of the letter having been written by this Abercrombie and Fitch model guy that used to be her neighbor. It makes me think that she was very loose with her affection. To me, I'll say it again, to me, she was everything. But to her, I was just another guy. I was just another guy. I was hung up on this girl, just, fully sick with one-itis for even like a couple years, probably after all this went down. And in all that time, I honestly don't think that I ever thought about her when I jacked off. That's how I was truly delusional. Because if you know a girl and you don't want to jack off to the thought of her, then that's not real attraction. And there's something fucked up in your head. You should want to jack off to the thought of a girl that, your future wife should be somebody that makes you want to do that. And if you don't want to do that, then you are some kind of creep or something. Okay? And that's the kind of thing, by the way, and I'll just end the video on this note. A few years ago, I looked her up on Facebook. I was hung up on her for a couple years after it all went down, but after that, I basically just kind of didn't even really think about her for a long time. I successfully repressed the memories. But a few years ago, I thought, hey, I'll look her up on Facebook. I got to the point where it didn't hurt to think about her anymore. So yeah, I was like, a few years ago, I'll look her up on Facebook. I did. And she's married now, of course, but she doesn't have any kids. She is covered in tattoos. And here's the thing, she got real fat. Okay? She is not looking good. So I'll just leave it there.